What happens when a gate agent, drunk on a tiny sliver of power, decides a person's skin color makes them unworthy of a first-class seat? She chose the wrong couple to bully. He was a man who negotiated with world leaders before breakfast. She was a woman who could dismantle a country's laws with a single argument. They were Dr. Alistair and Isabella Vance, traveling on a mission of global importance. But to Gate Agent Carol Peterson, they were just an obstacle. She was about to learn that some IDs don't just grant you access to a plane, they grant you the power to end careers, shatter lives, and deliver karma so swift, so complete, it would leave her in a state of collapse. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was a familiar symphony of chaos. The rolling thunder of suitcases on polished floors, the staccato announcements of departures and final boarding calls, and the murmur of 1,000 different life stories converging for a fleeting moment. For most, it was a stressful, anonymous limbo. For Dr. Alistair Vance and his wife, Isabella, it was simply the hallway between one world and the next. Alistair, a man whose quiet demeanor belied a mind that shaped international policy, adjusted the knot of his tie. At 55, his hair was a distinguished salt and pepper, and his eyes held the patient, analytical calm of a man who had seen civilizations rise and fall, not in history books, but across a negotiation table. He was dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that spoke of understated quality, not flashy wealth. His presence was grounding. He seemed to absorb the terminal's frantic energy, leaving only tranquility in his wake. Beside him, Isabella Vance was the embodiment of grace and strength. A renowned international human rights lawyer, she possessed a beauty that was secondary to the fierce intelligence in her gaze. Her dress, a simple but elegant navy blue, complemented the string of pearls at her neck, a gift from a delegation in Japan. She wasn't just Alistair's wife. She was his partner in a life dedicated to mending the fractured pieces of the world. They were a unit, a silent understanding passing between them with a simple glance. Their journey today was to Geneva for a high-stakes summit on global food security. A crisis was brewing in several developing nations, and Alistair was the keynote speaker, the man tasked with brokering a deal between bickering, powerful nations. It was work that left no room for error, and the flight was meant to be their final moment of peace, a chance to review their notes, to center themselves before the diplomatic battle ahead. They approached the priority boarding lane for Global Alliance Air Flight 714. The sign was clear: First Class, Diplomatic Corps, and Platinum Elite. They belonged to two of those categories. The line was short, occupied by a businessman barking into his phone and a young couple giddy with the excitement of their honeymoon. And then there was the gate agent. Her name tag read Carol Peterson. She was a woman in her late 40s, with hair dyed a brassy blonde, pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch the skin around her eyes. Her face was set in a permanent mask of sour disapproval, as if the entire world was a personal inconvenience. She processed the businessman with a series of curt, impatient gestures, snatching his passport and stamping his boarding pass with unnecessary force. As the Vances stepped forward, placing their passports and first-class tickets on the counter, Carol's eyes flickered over them, and a subtle, yet immediate, shift occurred. The practiced, robotic efficiency she had shown the previous passenger evaporated. It was replaced by a slow, deliberate lethargy. She did not meet their eyes. Instead, she picked up a bottle of hand sanitizer, meticulously cleaning her hands as if they had just touched something unclean. "Just a moment," she said, her voice flat, directed not at them, but at the computer screen in front of her. Alistair and Isabella waited patiently. They were accustomed to delays, to the small indignities of travel that even their status couldn't always prevent. But this felt different. There was a pointedness to Carol's silence, a deliberate act of ignoring them. She typed something into her keyboard with one finger, her brow furrowed in exaggerated concentration. "Good afternoon," Isabella said, her voice calm and pleasant, an attempt to bridge the strange, unspoken tension. Carol's eyes finally lifted. They were a flat, pale blue, and they held a look of profound skepticism. She scanned Isabella from head to toe, her gaze lingering for a moment on the pearls before moving to Alistair's suit. It was the kind of look that assessed and dismissed in the same instant. "Passports and boarding passes," she clipped, even though they were sitting directly in front of her. Alistair gently slid them an inch closer. "Here you are." Carol picked up Alistair's passport, flicking it open with a snap of her wrist. She stared at his photo, then back at his face. She did it again. It was a theatrical display of scrutiny. "Alistair Vance," she said, mispronouncing his first name as Alistair. "And you're in the first-class cabin." The question was loaded, the insinuation as thick and unpleasant as the stale air in the terminal. The "you" hung there, implying that his presence in that cabin was a statistical anomaly, a thing to be questioned. "Yes," Alistair replied, his voice even. "Seats 2A and 2B. Carol made a small, disbelieving sound, a humph that was pure condescension. She turned to Isabella's documents, repeating the same performative inspection. She ran their boarding passes under the scanner. It beeped affirmatively. A flicker of disappointment crossed her face, so fleeting that a less observant person might have missed it. But Isabella, a woman who read hostile witnesses for a living, saw it clearly. "There seems to be a problem with the scanner," Carol announced, her voice now carrying a note of feigned authority. "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside while I sort this out." "A problem?" Isabella asked, her tone still polite, but firming at the edges. "It appeared to work just fine. We heard the confirmation beep." Carol glared at her, her professional mask cracking to reveal the raw disdain beneath. "Ma'am, I am the gate agent. I will determine if it worked just fine." "You and your husband," she said the word as if it were an accusation, "need to step to the side. Now. You're holding up my line." The line consisted of the honeymooning couple, who were now watching the exchange with wide, uncomfortable eyes. There was no one else. Alistair placed a gentle hand on Isabella's arm. This was not the time or place. Geneva was waiting. "Of course," he said to Carol. "We'll wait here." They moved a few feet to the side, maintaining their dignity, as Carol beckoned the young couple forward with a saccharine-sweet smile that was a stark contrast to the venom she had just displayed. "Right this way, folks. Welcome aboard. Have a wonderful flight," she chirped, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. As the couple passed, the young woman gave Isabella an apologetic look. Isabella simply offered a small, reassuring nod in return. They would wait. They would be patient. But both of them knew, with a certainty that chilled the air around them, that this was not about a faulty scanner. This was about something much older and much uglier. And Carol Peterson, gate agent for Global Alliance Air, had just made the colossal mistake of choosing them as her target. The minutes stretched into an uncomfortable eternity. Carol Peterson processed the handful of remaining priority passengers with performative cheer, her laughter echoing unnaturally in the sterile environment of the gate area. With each passenger she waved through, she would cast a sideways triumphant glance at the Vances. It was a power play, a petty and public demonstration of her authority. She was making them wait, making them an exhibit. She wanted them to feel small, to feel misplaced. Alistair stood with a stillness that was almost monumental. On the outside, he was the picture of composure, but inside, a cold anger was beginning to coalesce. It was an anger he rarely felt, a tightly controlled fury reserved for tyrants and warlords, not gate agents in a New York airport. He thought of the file in his briefcase, detailing the impending famine that threatened millions of lives. He thought of the delegates in Geneva, the hours of delicate negotiation that lay ahead. Every minute wasted here, in this theatre of prejudice, felt like a betrayal of that mission. Isabella, meanwhile, was observing. She catalogued every detail. Carol's smug expressions, the nervous shifting of the other airline employees who occasionally glanced over but refused to intervene, the growing number of passengers in the general boarding area who were now openly staring. She recognized the pattern. It was the slow, deliberate isolation of a target, designed to humiliate and provoke a reaction she knew that would then be used as justification for further escalation. They would not give her that satisfaction. Finally, after the last first-class passenger had boarded, Carol turned her attention back to them. The artificial smile was gone, replaced by a stern, bureaucratic mask. "All right," she said, tapping her pen on the counter. "Let's try this again. I've been looking at your reservation." She hadn't touched the computer since they'd stepped aside. These tickets were booked with a very high-level government discount. We get these kinds of bookings flagged all the time. Often they're fraudulent, unauthorized use of a government code. The accusation was so audacious, so baseless, it was almost stunning. She wasn't just implying they didn't belong. She was accusing them of a crime. "I can assure you, our tickets are perfectly legitimate," Isabella said, her voice dropping to a lower, more serious register. It was the voice she used in the courtroom just before dismantling an opponent's argument. They were booked through the official State Department channels. Carol let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound utterly devoid of humor. "The State Department. Right. A lot of people try that line. Look, I need to see the official identification that authorizes this level of discount. A standard driver's license won't cut it." "That would be our diplomatic passports, which you are currently holding," Alistair stated, his patience wearing thin. The calm exterior remained, but his words were now clipped, precise. Carol sneered, flicking the dark blue booklets with her fingernail. "These can be faked, easily. I see knockoffs from Canal Street all the time. What I need is supplementary photo ID and the credit card used to purchase the tickets." This was a deliberate escalation, a creation of impossible bureaucratic hurdles. Diplomatic tickets were not purchased with personal credit cards. They were centrally billed. It was a rule she almost certainly knew, and if she didn't, her ignorance was dangerously unprofessional. "That's not how these bookings work, and you know that," Alistair said. "We can show you our State Department identification if you'd like, but the passports are the highest form of federal ID that exists. They are sufficient." He was giving her an out, a chance to retreat from the precipice of a monumental error. Carol saw the out and chose to leap past it. To her, their calm, articulate resistance wasn't a sign of their legitimacy. It was a sign that they were practiced criminals. Her prejudice had created a narrative in her mind, and every piece of evidence was being twisted to fit it. Wealthy, educated black couple in first class? Impossible. Must be a scam. "Sir, don't tell me how to do my job," she snapped, her voice rising in pitch, attracting more attention. "Everyone's a lawyer until it's time to follow the rules. Now, I need to see a credit card with the name Vance on it that matches this reservation. If you can't provide it, I can't let you on this plane." End of story. The finality in her tone was absolute. This was her kingdom, the 60 square feet of linoleum behind the boarding counter, and she was its undisputed queen. "This is becoming ridiculous," Isabella said, her patience finally exhausted. "You are making a serious allegation of fraud. You have our legal travel documents, our confirmed tickets, and our government credentials. If you have a legitimate concern, you need to call your station manager or a supervisor. Otherwise, you need to let us board our flight." The word supervisor was a trigger. It was a challenge to Carol's authority, and her face flushed a blotchy, angry red. "Oh, I'll call a supervisor, don't you worry," she spat, her voice dripping with malice. "But I'm not calling them for you. I'm calling them for me. I'm calling airport security to have you removed from my gate area. You are being disruptive, and you are refusing to comply with a standard security check." She reached for the phone, her hand trembling slightly with a mixture of rage and adrenaline. This was it. The point of no return. She wasn't just delaying them anymore. She was actively trying to have them detained. Alistair watched her, and a profound sense of sorrow washed over his anger. He looked at this woman, consumed by a hatred so baseless it was absurd, and he saw a sickness, but it was a sickness that was about to have very real, very severe consequences. "I think that would be a mistake, Carol," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying an immense weight. He used her first name for the first time, and the sound of it seemed to startle her. It broke through her tirade, a small crack in her armor of self-righteousness. But it was too late. She had already started dialing. "Security to gate B42, she barked into the receiver. "I have a code Bravo situation. 2 individuals, non-compliant, suspected document fraud." Code Bravo. It was a term designed to sound serious, to elicit an immediate and forceful response. Isabella knew what it meant. A potential security threat. Carol wasn't just being prejudiced, she was actively endangering them, painting them as a threat in a post-9/11 airport environment where such an accusation could have life-altering consequences. The civility was gone, stripped away by the raw, ugly prejudice of one woman. The hushed whispers in the larger seating area grew louder. Phones were being discreetly raised, their small red recording lights blinking in the fluorescent glare. The stage was set. The audience was assembled. And Carol Peterson had just written herself into a tragedy of her own making. The arrival of 2 Port Authority police officers was swift. They moved with a practiced, heavy-footed urgency, their hands resting near their sidearms, their eyes scanning the scene with a mixture of boredom and readiness. To them, it was just another call, another Code Bravo, that would most likely turn out to be a dispute over baggage fees. They were met by Carol, who had puffed herself up like a cornered animal. She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at Alistair and Isabella. "Them," she said, her voice laced with a vindicated hiss. "They're refusing to provide identification, and their tickets are fraudulent. They became aggressive when I questioned them." The lie was blatant, almost comical in its audacity. Alistair and Isabella had not moved. Their demeanor was the very antithesis of aggressive. But the officers didn't know that. They only had the word of a uniformed airline employee. "Sir, ma'am," the taller officer, a man with a thick mustache and the name O'Malley on his vest, began. "We need you to come with us. We're going to sort this out away from the gate." "Officer, with all due respect, that won't be necessary," Isabella said, stepping forward slightly. Her legal training kicked in, her mind becoming a sharp, clear instrument. "This gate agent is making a baseless accusation. We have provided our legal travel documents, and she has refused to accept them. We are ticketed first-class passengers on this flight, which is scheduled to depart shortly. We have no intention of going anywhere but onto that airplane." Her voice was not loud, but it resonated with an unshakable authority that made Officer O'Malley pause. He was used to dealing with shouting and hysterics. This calm, articulate confidence was disarming, but Carol would not be disarmed. She saw this as a direct challenge, an attempt to usurp her moment of power. "They're refusing to comply," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "See? This is what I was talking about. You need to remove them. They are a security risk." The phrase, security risk, was the nuclear option. It changed the entire dynamic. The unease in the terminal curdled into genuine fear. Passengers began to shrink back. O'Malley's partner, a younger, more nervous-looking officer, put his hand on his weapon. "Let's not make this difficult, ma'am." Alistair stepped in front of his wife, a subtle, protective movement. He looked directly at O'Malley, his gaze unflinching. "Officer, I understand you have a protocol to follow," he said, his voice a low, commanding rumble. "But this woman is lying, and if you lay a hand on my wife or myself, you will be creating an international incident of a magnitude you cannot possibly comprehend. Now, the correct procedure here is not to remove us. It is to call the airline station manager. Immediately." The sheer force of his personality, the absolute certainty in his words, gave O'Malley another moment of hesitation. He had been a cop at JFK for 15 years. He'd seen all kinds. He knew how to read people, and these two people did not read like criminals. They read like something else. Something important. His radio crackled. "Dispatch to Port Authority at B-42. What's your 20? Before O'Malley could respond, a new figure bustled onto the scene. He was a harried-looking man in a slightly too small suit, his tie askew, a Global Alliance Air Duty Manager badge clipped to his lapel. His name was Mark Jenkins. "What in God's name is going on here, Carol?" he demanded, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. The two police officers, the stunned crowd of passengers, and the Vances, standing resolute in the center of the storm. Carol's face lit up with relief. Here was her reinforcement. "Mark, thank God. These two, they're trying to board with fake tickets, a fraudulent government code. I tried to verify their ID, and they became hostile and disruptive. I had to call security." Mark Jenkins looked from Carol's furious, blotchy face to the unnaturally calm demeanor of Alistair and Isabella. He was a man drowning in a sea of logistical nightmares. A delayed flight from Dallas, a catering mix-up on the London route, and now this. He wanted it to be over. His initial instinct was to trust his employee. "Sir, ma'am, I'm the station manager," he said, addressing the Vances. "We just need to clear this up. If you could just show my agent the credit card you used." Isabella cut him off, her voice like ice. "We have already explained to your agent that this is not a commercial booking. We have also offered to show our supplementary government identification, an offer she ignored. Instead, she chose to publicly accuse us of fraud and endanger us by labeling us a security threat. Your employee is not just incompetent, she is a liability." Mark's face paled slightly. The word liability was a trigger for any middle manager. "Now, see here," he began, but Alistair interrupted him. "No, Mr. Jenkins, you see here," Alistair said, his voice losing its last trace of patience. The diplomat was gone, replaced by the full weight of the authority he carried. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket, his movements slow and deliberate. Everyone tensed. Officer O'Malley's hand went back to his sidearm. Alistair did not pull out a weapon. He produced a simple, black leather wallet. From it, he extracted a single, laminated card. It was not a driver's license or a credit card. It was a dark blue card with a gold seal. He didn't hand it to Carol. He didn't even hand it to the police. He held it out for the station manager, Mark Jenkins. "My name is Dr. Alistair Vance, This is my wife, Isabella Vance, Esquire. We are traveling to Geneva on official diplomatic state business. The passports you have been holding are not knockoffs. They are United States diplomatic passports. The card I am holding is my Department of State diplomatic identification card. It carries a security clearance that I assure you is quite real." He paused, letting the words sink in. The area around them had fallen completely silent, save for the hum of the terminal. "Your agent Carol has detained us for nearly 20 minutes, based on nothing more than her own personal prejudice. She has libeled us, and she has obstructed official government travel. In doing so, she has not only insulted us, but she has insulted the United States government. You now have two choices, Mr. Jenkins. You can either escort us onto that plane immediately, or we can stand here and wait for the Diplomatic Security Service to arrive. I assure you, they will be far less pleasant than we are." Mark Jenkins stared at the ID card as if it were a venomous snake. The gold eagle seemed to mock him. Diplomatic Security Service, international incident. These were phrases that haunted the nightmares of airline executives. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He looked at Carol. He saw the smug certainty on her face finally begin to crumble, replaced by a dawning, sickening horror. Her jaw went slack. The blood drained from her face, leaving her skin a pasty, greyish colour. She had not just picked a fight. She had, in her ignorance and bigotry, attempted to pick a fight with a superpower, and the shock wave of that mistake was about to bring her entire world crashing down. The silence at Gate B42 was no longer just a pause in the ambient noise. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket. The words United States diplomatic passports and Diplomatic Security Service hung in the air, charged with a power that dwarfed Carol Peterson's petty authority. Mark Jenkins, the station manager, felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He snatched Alistair's passport from the counter, his hands fumbling. He stared at the official designations, the special endorsements he had been trained to recognize but had rarely seen. It was all there, in stark, undeniable print. He then looked at Isabella's. It was the same. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was a catastrophe, a full-blown, career-ending, multi-million-dollar lawsuit catastrophe. His head snapped toward Carol. "What have you done?" he whispered, his voice a strangled rasp. Carol stared back, her pale blue eyes wide with confusion and a terrifying, encroaching dread. "But the discount code," she stammered, her brain refusing to process the new reality. Her carefully constructed narrative of sophisticated fraudsters was shattering into a million pieces. "It's a designated diplomatic fare, you imbecile," Mark hissed, his voice low and vicious, trying to keep the full scope of the disaster from the dozens of passengers recording on their phones. "It's pre-cleared at the highest levels. You don't question it. You don't even look at it. You just say, 'Have a good flight, Ambassador,' and you let them on the plane." The word ambassador struck Carol with the force of a physical blow. While Alistair didn't hold that specific title, the implication was clear. These were not just people. They were institutions. She looked at the Vances, truly looked at them for the first time, not through the grimy filter of her prejudice, but as they were. Two figures of immense and quiet power, their dignity intact, their composure a silent testament to their station. She saw the quality of their clothes, the intelligence in their eyes, the utter confidence of their bearing, and she was flooded with a nauseating wave of realization. She hadn't been clever. She had been a fool. Officer O'Malley, sensing the monumental shift in power, subtly took a step back from the Vances. He cleared his throat and spoke into his radio, his voice suddenly deferential. "Dispatch, Situation at B-42 is under control. It's a civil matter with the airline. We're standing down." He gave Alistair a short, respectful nod, a silent apology from one public servant to another. Isabella spoke, her voice cutting through the manager's frantic whispers. "Mr. Jenkins." Mark flinched as if he'd been struck. He turned to her, his face a mask of panicked obsequiousness. "Yes, Mrs. Vance, yes, ma'am, I am so sorry. This is an unacceptable, deeply regrettable—" "Save your apologies, Mr. Jenkins. They are as meaningless as your employees' accusations," she said, her tone devoid of malice, but heavy with the weight of judgment. "What I require from you right now are the names and employee numbers of everyone involved. That includes yourself, Gate Agent Peterson, and the 2 Port Authority officers." It wasn't a request. It was a directive. It was the voice of a lawyer preparing a case, brick by methodical brick. Of course, right away," Mark stammered, frantically patting his pockets for a pen. The pilot and first officer of Flight 714, a tall, silver-haired captain named David Evans, and his younger co-pilot, had emerged from the jet bridge, alerted by the delay and the commotion. "Mark, what's the hold-up?" Captain Evans asked, his brow furrowed. "We're going to miss our window." Mark Jenkins scurried over to him, whispering frantically and gesturing toward the Vances. The captain's eyes widened. He looked at the Vances, then at Carol, then back at his station manager. His professional, unflappable expression hardened into one of pure fury. He strode past Mark, directly to Alistair and Isabella. "Dr. Vance, Mrs. Vance, on behalf of the flight crew of Global Alliance Air, please accept my deepest apologies. It is an honor to have you with us today. Please come aboard. We will not depart without you." He then turned, his gaze falling upon Carol Peterson like a physical weight. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The contempt in his eyes was enough. "You," he said, his voice quiet and deadly. "You are a disgrace to this airline and to this uniform. You will not be the agent closing out this flight." He turned to another gate agent, a young woman who had been watching the entire scene with horrified fascination. "Maria, you're closing us out. Get their luggage stowed and get them seated. Now." This public denunciation, this stripping of her duties in front of her colleagues and 100 passengers, was the first real consequence. It was a public shaming, and for Carol, it was devastating. Her authority, the only thing that gave her a sense of worth in a life she felt had cheated her, was gone. Evaporated. Alistair and Isabella, escorted personally by the captain, finally walked down the jet bridge. They didn't look back. They didn't need to. The damage was done. The mechanism of consequence was already in motion. As they disappeared from view, Mark Jenkins rounded on Carol. His face was pale, his hands were shaking, but his eyes burned with the terror of a man watching his career go up in flames. "My office. Now," he ordered. But Carol didn't seem to hear him. She was staring at the empty space where the Vances had stood. Her mind was a maelstrom of flashing images. The dark blue passports, the gold seal on the ID card, the captain's furious eyes, the sea of phone cameras. Diplomat, international incident, liability, disgrace. The words echoed in her head, each one a hammer blow against the fragile foundation of her self-righteousness. She had been so sure, so absolutely, unshakably certain of her judgment. That certainty was now revealed to be nothing more than a cheap, ugly prejudice, and she had bet her entire life on it. A high-pitched ringing started in her ears. The fluorescent lights of the terminal seemed to pulse and brighten, searing her eyes. The faces of the watching passengers blurred into a single, monstrous, judging entity. Her breath hitched in her chest. She couldn't draw in enough air. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "Carol?" Mark's voice sounded distant, as if coming from the other end of a long tunnel. She put a hand on the counter to steady herself, but her fingers found no purchase. A black wave rose up from the edge of her vision, rushing toward the center. The strength fled from her legs. The world dissolved into a cacophony of noise and light. And then, nothing. In front of a silent gate area and a dozen recording smartphones, Carol Peterson, the self-appointed queen of Gate B42, collapsed onto the floor in a dead faint. The sound of Carol Peterson's body hitting the linoleum floor was a dull, sickening thud that broke the spell of stunned silence at the gate. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. For a moment, no one moved. Her collapse was so sudden, so complete, it seemed like the final dramatic act in a play that had gone horribly wrong. Mark Jenkins, for all his panic and fury, was the first to react. His managerial instincts, buried under layers of terror, kicked in. "Somebody call the paramedics!" he yelled, rushing around the counter to where Carol lay in a crumpled heap. Officer O'Malley was already on his radio, his voice calm and professional. "Dispatch, we have a medical situation at Gate B42. Adult female, conscious, fainted. Requesting medical assistance." He had said she was conscious, but she wasn't. Her eyes were closed, her face was ashen, and a trickle of blood was beginning to seep from a cut on her temple, where she had hit the corner of a wastebasket on her way down. The scene descended into a new kind of chaos. No longer the theater of confrontation, it was now the controlled frenzy of a medical emergency. Airline staff rushed forward with a first aid kit. The remaining passengers were herded back, told to give them space. The entire focus shifted from the Vances, who were now safely on the plane, to the woman lying on the floor, the architect of her own spectacular downfall. Inside the quiet, climate-controlled sanctuary of the first-class cabin, Isabella settled into her plush leather seat. The flight attendant, a woman with a kind, worried face named Susan, offered her a glass of champagne. "Mrs. Vance, I am so terribly sorry for what you just endured," Susan said, her voice sincere. "That was unprofessional. It's not who we are." "Thank you, Susan. It's all right," Isabella replied. Though it wasn't. It was far from all right. Alistair sat beside her, his briefcase on his lap. He had already opened it and was looking at his files, but his focus wasn't there. He was replaying the events in his mind, not with anger, but with a profound and weary sadness. This was the very poison they fought on a global scale, the US versus them mentality, the dehumanization of others based on prejudice. To find it here, so raw and undiluted on their own doorstep, was a grim reminder of how deeply the rot went. "It never ceases to amaze me," he said quietly, speaking more to himself than to Isabella. "The sheer, self-destructive power of bigotry." Isabella reached over and placed her hand on his. "We can't let it derail us, Alistair. Geneva is too important." "I know," he sighed, closing the file. "But it's the principle. What if we weren't who we are? What if we were just a regular couple, a doctor and a lawyer who had saved up for 10 years to take a first-class trip? She would have ruined it. She would have had them arrested, humiliated them, and faced zero consequences. The system would have believed her over them. That's what's truly chilling." He was right. Their status was a shield, a superpower that had allowed them to win this skirmish. But for millions of others who looked like them, that shield didn't exist. Just then, Captain Evans appeared at the entrance to the cabin. He leaned in, his expression grave. "Dr. and Mrs. Vance," he said in a low voice, "I apologize for the further delay. The gate agent who confronted you has had a medical emergency." She collapsed, They're taking her to the hospital now. We'll be closing the doors and pushing back as soon as they clear the area." Isabella and Alistair exchanged a look. There was no triumph in it, no satisfaction, only a complex and somber acknowledgement. "Is she all right?" Isabella asked, her compassion an instinct she couldn't suppress, even for the woman who had treated her with such contempt. "I believe she regained consciousness," the captain replied, "but she's being transported out. Frankly, her health is the least of her concerns right now. I've already been on the phone with corporate. The videos are all over the internet. The fallout from this, it's going to be immense." He nodded to them again and retreated to the cockpit. The cabin door was sealed with a heavy thud, shutting out the world of the terminal and its ugly drama. The plane began its slow, powerful pushback from the gate. Back at B-42, Carol Peterson was coming to. The first thing she felt was a throbbing pain in her head. The first thing she saw was the concerned face of a paramedic leaning over her. The first thing she heard were the fragmented, urgent voices around her. Major liability. Viral video. The hashtag is @GlobalAlliance. Shame. Call legal immediately. Diplomatic complaint is being filed. Her memory came rushing back, not in a trickle, but in a tidal wave. The passports, the ID card, the captain's face. The collapse wasn't just physical, it was the total implosion of her reality. The faint had been her mind's emergency eject button, a desperate attempt to escape a truth too terrible to bear. As the paramedics helped her onto a stretcher, she saw Mark Jenkins talking on his phone, his back to her, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He wasn't looking at her with concern for her health. He was dealing with the professional hurricane she had unleashed. She was no longer a person to him. She was a problem to be managed, a mess to be cleaned up. The straps were buckled across her chest, and they began to wheel her through the terminal. The passengers, her audience, stared. Their faces were no longer filled with shock or entertainment, but with a cold, detached pity and contempt. They looked at her the way people look at a car wreck, a moment of morbid curiosity before they move on with their lives. She had wanted to be seen. She had wanted to be powerful. And in that moment, being wheeled through a crowd of strangers, stripped of her uniform, her dignity, and her job, she was more visible and more powerless than she had ever been in her life. This was not just a collapse of the body. It was the collapse of a life built on a foundation of sand, washed away by a tide of her own making. The Global Alliance air flight, 714 to Geneva, was a study in contrasts. In the first-class cabin, there was a hushed, respectful quiet. The flight crew treated the Vances with a reverence that bordered on awe, their service attentive but unobtrusive. Susan, the flight attendant, made sure their champagne glasses were never empty and their meals were served with an extra flourish. It was an apology rendered in impeccable service. For their part, Alistair and Isabella focused on their work, the crisis in Geneva, a far more pressing concern than the drama they had left behind. They were professionals, and their mission came first. But in the rest of the world, the storm Carol Peterson had unleashed was just beginning to rage. Before Flight 714 had even reached cruising altitude, the videos were everywhere. Dozens of angles, captured by passengers, all showing the same ugly sequence of events. Carol's condescending dismissal, her escalating aggression, her false accusations, and Alistair's calm, devastating reveal. The hashtag #GlobalAlliance shame was trending worldwide. News outlets picked up the story, and the Vances' identities were quickly confirmed. The narrative was irresistible. A racist gate agent attempts to bully a prominent black diplomat and his lawyer wife, only to have it blow up in her face in the most spectacular fashion. Global Alliance Air's corporate headquarters went into full-scale panic mode. Their stock price took a noticeable dip in after-hours trading. Their PR department worked through the night, crafting a public statement that was a masterclass in groveling. It was released before the Vances even landed in Geneva. Global Alliance Air is appalled by the unacceptable and discriminatory behavior exhibited by one of our employees at JFK Terminal 4, it began. This isolated incident does not reflect our company's values of diversity, inclusion, and respect for all our passengers. We have launched a full and immediate investigation. The employee in question has been suspended without pay, pending termination. We have reached out to Dr. and Mrs. Vance to offer our most sincere and unreserved apology for the disgraceful treatment they received. Carol Peterson learned of her suspension not from her manager, but from a news alert on her phone as she was being discharged from the hospital with 3 stitches on her temple and a diagnosis of a panic-induced vasovagal syncope. The hospital room, which for a few hours had been a refuge from reality, suddenly felt like a cage. Her union representative called, his voice grim. He told her there was nothing he could do. The video evidence was too damning, the victims too high profile. The airline was going to make an example of her. She went home to her small, tidy apartment in Queens, an apartment that suddenly felt precarious. Her life had been built around her job, the routine, the small measure of authority, the travel benefits. It was all she had. She had been with the airline for 22 years. She had started in baggage handling and had clawed her way up to the coveted gate agent position. She had seen herself as a guardian, a protector of the rules. Now she was a pariah. Her son Daniel, a college student studying engineering, called her that evening. His voice was strained. "Mom, what did you do?" he asked, the disappointment clear even over the phone. "My friends are sending me the video. It's everywhere." "It was a misunderstanding, Danny," she said, her voice weak. "They didn't have the right paperwork." "Mom, stop!" he cut her off. "Just stop. I saw the video. He showed you a diplomatic passport. Just. Why would you do that?" Carol had no answer, because how could she explain the ugly, tangled knot of resentment and prejudice that lived inside her? How could she explain that she saw a successful black couple and her mind had short-circuited, defaulting to suspicion instead of respect? It wasn't a rational thought. It was a poison she had been sipping for years, and it had finally killed her. But the true, karmic masterstroke was yet to come. Daniel was a brilliant student, but he attended a costly private university. His tuition was a constant source of stress for Carol. His only hope of finishing his degree without incurring a mountain of debt was a prestigious scholarship from the Atherton Foundation for Excellence in Engineering. He was a finalist. The final interview was next week. It was a scholarship that not only covered tuition, but guaranteed a high-paying internship. It was his future. A few days later, an email arrived in Daniel's inbox. It was from the Atherton Foundation. "Dear Mr. Peterson," it read, "we regret to inform you that we are rescinding your finalist status for the Atherton Scholarship. The Foundation's charter includes a significant character and ethics component, as our recipients are expected to be future leaders in their field. In light of a recent, widely publicized incident involving a member of your immediate family that has come to our attention, the board has determined that proceeding with your candidacy would be inconsistent with the values we wish to promote. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." Daniel read the email 3 times, the words blurring through a haze of disbelief and fury. He knew what it meant. He called his mother, his voice shaking with a rage she had never heard from him. "They pulled it, Mom," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "The Atherton Scholarship. They pulled my application because of you." Carol felt the last bit of air leave her lungs. "No, they can't do that." "They did. It's gone. Everything I worked for, my entire future, gone. Because you couldn't just be polite. Because you had to be a monster to those people at the airport. I was trying to protect you," she sobbed, the desperate, nonsensical cry of a cornered animal. "The overtime, the money for your school. You weren't protecting me," he roared, the line crackling with his anger. "You were embarrassing me. You were embarrassing our entire family, and now you've ruined me." The line went dead. He had hung up on her. Carol sat in her silent apartment, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. She had lost her job. She had lost her reputation. And now, she had lost her son. She had destroyed the very thing she claimed to be working for. What she didn't know, what she could never have known, was the final, devastating irony. In Geneva, after a long day of successful negotiations, Isabella Vance was reviewing documents for several charitable boards she sat on in her spare time. One of them was the Atherton Foundation. She had seen Daniel Peterson's application. She had been impressed by his essays, his grades. She had been prepared to champion his cause. The foundation's director had emailed her about the incident, asking for her guidance. They were prepared to overlook it if she gave the word. Isabella looked at the file, at the bright, hopeful face of Carol Peterson's son. She thought of the sneer on his mother's face, the venom in her voice, and she thought about the principle of the matter. Actions have consequences, not just for you, but for those around you. With a heavy heart, she typed her reply. "The Foundation's charter is clear. The ethics clause must be upheld. I will recuse myself from the final vote, but I support the board's decision to maintain its standards." It was not an act of revenge. It was an act of justice, cold, impartial, and utterly devastating. The karma was not just that Carol lost her job. It was that her own actions, judged by the very person she had wronged, had directly annihilated her son's dreams. Weeks turned into months. The world, as it always does, moved on. The Forstjanth Global Alliance shame hashtag was replaced by a dozen new outrages. Global Alliance Air, having fired Carol and implemented a mandatory, company-wide anti-bias training program they named the Vance Initiative, saw their stock price recover. For the public, the incident was becoming a faded memory, a viral video anecdote. But for Carol Peterson, the fallout was her new, permanent reality. She couldn't find another job in the airline industry. She was blacklisted, her name a cautionary tale whispered in break rooms and training sessions. The videos, though no longer trending, were eternally archived on the internet, a digital ghost that would haunt any potential employer who bothered to Google her name. She eventually found work as a cashier at a bleak 24-hour convenience store on the midnight shift, a job that paid less than half her previous salary and came with a clientele that was often drunk, desperate, or both. The work was grueling and anonymous. Her crisp airline uniform was replaced by a cheap polyester smock that always smelled faintly of stale coffee and hot dogs. Her authority was gone. Now people barked orders at her, complained about the price of milk, and occasionally tried to pay with counterfeit bills. She was no longer a gatekeeper. She was invisible, a functional cog in a machine she despised. Every night, she went home to her silent apartment, the silence a constant reminder of her son, who refused to speak to her. Daniel had been forced to drop out of his prestigious university, taking on 2 jobs to save up money for a state school. The bright future that had been within his grasp was gone. One rainy Tuesday morning, After a particularly difficult shift, Carol found a letter in her mailbox. The envelope was thick, made of expensive cream-colored paper. The return address was in Washington, D.C. Her heart seized. It was from Isabella Vance. Her first instinct was to tear it up, to throw it away unopened. But she couldn't. She had to know. With trembling hands, she opened the seal. The letter was not what she expected. It wasn't a lawsuit notification or a gloating condemnation. It was short, typed, and precise. Ms. Peterson, it has come to my attention that your son, Daniel Peterson, was a casualty of the consequences of your actions on that day at JFK. That was not our intention. While we believe that accountability is paramount, we do not believe that a child should pay for the mistakes of a parent. Enclosed, you will find a check made out to Daniel Peterson. It is a personal grant from my husband and myself to be used for his educational expenses. It is sufficient to cover his remaining tuition and board at his former university. We are not doing this for you. We are doing this for him, because we believe in the potential of the next generation to build a better, more compassionate world. We hope he will use this opportunity to do so. Sincerely, Isabella Vance. Tucked inside was a cashier's check. The amount written on it made Carol gasp. It was more money than she had ever seen in one place. It was enough. It was everything Daniel needed. It was a lifeline. But it was not a lifeline for her. It was a final, crushing judgment. The Vances had not sought revenge. They had not tried to ruin her. In fact, they had done the opposite. They had repaired the collateral damage of her hatred. They had saved her son. And in doing so, they had shown her the vast, unbridgeable chasm between her own character and theirs. They had risen above the ugliness she had thrown at them, and in their grace they had handed her a punishment far more profound than any court could levy. They had forced her to live with their mercy every time she would see her son succeed, and she knew he would. She would be reminded that his success was not thanks to her, but in spite of her. It was a success purchased by the grace of the very people she had despised. They had not destroyed her. They had rendered her utterly, hopelessly irrelevant. Carol sat down at her small kitchen table, the check in one hand and the letter in the other. Tears began to stream down her face. They were not tears of gratitude or relief. They were tears of shame, a deep, burning, inconsolable shame that came from staring into the abyss of her own heart and finally seeing the poverty within. The collapse at the airport had been sudden and public, but this was the final, quiet reckoning, the slow, internal collapse of a soul forced to confront its own ugliness with no one to blame but itself, and that was a karma from which there was no recovery. In the end, karma wasn't the loss of a job or a viral shaming. True karma was the quiet, undeniable truth Carol Peterson had to face every single day. Her hatred had cost her son his future, and the compassion of those she hated is what gave it back. The Vances didn't just win a confrontation, they won with character. They showed that the most powerful response to prejudice isn't to return the hate, but to rise so far above it that its only option is to collapse under the weight of its own ugliness. This story is a harsh reminder that our actions create ripples we cannot control, and sometimes the kindest gesture can be the most devastating judgment of all. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories of drama, justice, and the undeniable power of karma. Thank you for watching.